Associates about the control of the international brigades by the Soviet secret police and the liquidation of anti-communists, about the assimilation of so many of the
Well,
anti-Franco
hello, folks.
veterans
Just a
into the
couple of
international
things to
communist family.
introduce what I'm going to talk about today. Yeah, yesterday I was, or the other day, a few days ago, I was in the park acting silly, talking about cyberpunk Jesus and all that kind of thing. And, it's just funny to think about if Jesus came back in the flesh, would he use modern technology to reach his flock? And if Donald Trump is the instrument of Jesus, obviously Jesus's instrument is using modern technology and propaganda and Twitter, whatever, to do the Lord's work. So it's funny to think about, is the world financial system finally going to be sorted out by, the Christ coin or whatever? Does God need the blockchain? And God works in mysterious ways because good old Donald Trump wasn't president for the last 4 years for some mysterious reason. So I'm going to read a couple of quotes from this article that I checked out today about, the crucifixion of Donald Trump, his martyrdom, and how his being indicted on criminal charges is going to make sure that he's the next president of the United States of America. And, the vengeful Christ is going to come to the aid of the true believers. And then I'll talk about James Burnham's book, Suicide of the West, which I think is a great book to read if you want to understand how many reactionaries or conservatives characterize liberals. They have a way of seeing us, and it articulates it perfectly well. And it's quite a good book to understand, the perspective of reactionaries and conservatives. So I'll take you through that and that other article. And yeah, so let's do that right now. Okay, so quickly I'll take you through this article, The Crucifixion Complex, Word and Way. Brian Kaler has a site, Substack thing. He's a Baptist, I believe. So he writes from a Christian perspective, but he's bright and decent intellectual rigor and all that kind of thing. So he's worth reading even if you're not a Christian. Not a big deal. So the Trump fanatics and the MAGA people, some of them Christians, really believe that Donald J. Trump is ordained by God to lead the United States. So here's a quote along those lines relating to Trump having to go to court. So, and Mary Magdalene, she wasn't a prostitute. There's no evidence that she was a prostitute in the Bible, the New Testament. Did Jesus hang out with criminals and prostitutes and whatever? Tax collectors. Anyway, Donald is a different breed of cat. I think we could all agree on that. He's not an angel, but, maybe to some people he's Jesus. So, quote, President Trump will be arrested during Lent, a time of suffering and purification for the followers of Jesus Christ, tweeted Joseph McBride, an attorney who has represented January 6 defendants. As Christ was crucified and then rose again on the third day, so too will at real Donald Trump. Unquote. So now this guy is, he's a showboat. He's a lawyer. He's doing what he's got to do for his client, but people resonate with that. So he goes on to say, "Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and one's foes will be members of one's own household." Unquote. McBride tweeted from Matthew 10. So here you have flags, Trump or death, 2024. So the seasons continue. He's talking about trumping Jesus. And of course, so many Christians just aren't fanatics. They're not white ethno-state people. They're not ultra-right violent people. Most Christians in the United States, I would say, are not like that. So it's like the woke mob. How many people? Are all cities in the United States being overrun by LGBTQ types? Are all the U.S. flags at people's houses being replaced by rainbow flags? How bad is it? Well, the media, everything's terrible. So another quote, "You have people today that literally, I think in their heart, they may not say it, but they equate Donald Trump with the person of Jesus Christ," Kinzinger said. "And to them, if you even come out against this amazing man, Donald Trump, which is obviously quite flawed, you are coming out against Jesus, against their Christian values. And when you go after their religion, that violates the depth of who they are." So religion is powerful. God didn't die in the 19th century. For many people, their relationship to God, to religion, is really important. And if they equate Donald Trump with their religion, it's going to be one powerful thing for them. And you can't ignore that. Quote, "Before you take this historic vote today, 1 week before Christmas, I want you to keep this in mind. When Jesus was falsely accused of treason, Pontius Pilate gave Jesus the opportunity to face his accusers. During that sham trial, Pontius Pilate afforded more rights to Jesus than the Democrats have afforded to this president in this process," Loudermilk declared as he loudly milked the story beyond the facts. So they're talking about the politicization of all of this and using religion, politics to get everybody excited. It's a good article. It's worth reading. Even if you're not a Christian, you got to have insights on how people feel about these things. And there are moderate people and many ways to interpret the Christian religion. And there's many kinds of Christs, depending on whether you're a Pentecostal or a Catholic or Orthodox or whatever. There are lots of ways to think about it. And people co-opt religion all the time to bolster their position. And it's a community thing. The congregation stands firm together in their beliefs. Invoking Trump as a persecuted Jesus grossly redefines the teachings, life, and death of Jesus. It's an attempt to craft a new version of Jesus, the kind of Jesus we want, the crass Jesus, who takes vengeance against our enemies and helps us feel comfortable with our vices. So some people want a wrathful, badass Jesus, right? Not a cute little sweet baby Jesus. So, quote, if your Jesus is standing in the way of that, the mean mafia Jesus, tough guy Jesus, your Jesus has to go or be replaced or rewritten, wrote Michael Bood, a professor of Catholic Studies and Political Science at DePaul University, as he criticized the desire for a mafia leader version of Jesus in his book, Foolishness to Gentiles. We do not want to see anything contrary to the Christ of violence, and we are prepared to take drastic steps, including killing, to protect our right to a Savior armed and at our beck and call, or at least when willing to bless us in whatever roles require us to kill. We like this picture of Christ, and for us to give him up, you will have to pry him loose from our cold, dead hands. And you know, if you really study the Middle Ages and the Crusades and whatnot, it wasn't just going to Israel to murder Saracens or whatever. It was a lot deeper than that, but that's a whole other thing, history. So the biggest problem isn't comparing a politician with authoritarian tendencies to Jesus. It's that too often we want to give up the real Jesus for Lent. So that's how Brian Kaler concludes his piece. And of course, who's your real Jesus? You tell me, who's your real Jesus? If you're a Jesuit or if you're a Latter-day Saints person or whatever. There's a lot of different Jesuses out there, including in the New Testament. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Different versions. Okay, so I just thought it would be interesting to look into this because we're going to have a whole year of this Trump as Jesus thing coming up. So now I'm going to move on to Burnham's book. So now we're in my Kindle. So, Suicide of the West, an essay on the meaning and destiny of liberalism. So I think for James Burnham, liberalism ends in the suicide of the West. So whatever the West is, I don't think he really defines that much in this book. What he's really after is characterizing what the liberal is. So we've all been brainwashed in our culture with liberalism. When did that start? I don't know. Several hundred years ago? I don't know. In the 1930s, after World War II. Anyway, so he published this in 1964, and then it's been republished. And the last publication of this book was in 2014. And not much has changed in terms of how certain kinds of conservatives characterize liberals. And I want to get into looking at these things, globalism, don't like that. Certain kinds of democracy, not good. Modernity, not good. Things like this, progressivism, not good. So, what is the agenda? How does the world look in the perfect conservative world, or multipolarity of the perfect conservative world? Live and let live conservatives across the planet in their little blood and soil, racial or non-racial, ethnic, ethno-cultural unities, nation states, tribes, whatever, nations. How are they managed? How do you manage the unruly masses? What is ignorant? If you don't know all the plants in the forest, are you ignorant? Or is it just if you didn't go to Yale and learn how to code capital, then you're an idiot? So we all think other people are idiots. So anyway, it's an interesting book to read, and it gives you good insight on perspectives from the right on liberals. What do they think about liberals? So this part is who are liberals, and he's got an interesting questionnaire. So to his mind, this is like a scientific data set. He somehow gave somebody somewhere, some cohort of people, this questionnaire, and if you answer yes to all these questions, 39 questions, then you're definitely a liberal. If you say absolutely not to all of it, then you're probably a reactionary or a neo-reactionary X or whatever. And then there's some in between, but not much. Most people would fall to the right or to the left. So they'd say no to most of the questions or yes to most or all of the questions, and then you know how to peg them. So this is the disease of liberalism. Questions like all forms of racial segregation and discrimination are wrong. You answer yes, you're a liberal. Everyone is entitled to his own opinion, liberal. Everyone has a right to free public education, liberal. Political, economic, and social discrimination based on religious belief is wrong, liberal. Because, our world just isn't like that. We had ISIS. You have Shia and Sunni people. You had the Inquisition. You had the 30 Years' War. People are like that. In political or military conflict, it is wrong to use methods of torture and physical terror, liberal. A popular movement or revolt against a tyranny or dictatorship is right and deserves approval, liberal. So you don't like Franco, liberal. Of course you don't like Mao or Xi or Putin or commies, enemies who are dictators. Of course not, because they're commies. You don't like Castro for sure. But maybe Salazar's a great guy. In some ways, maybe even Caesar was good, or maybe not. Caesarianism, Bonapartism. And if you're Curtis Yarvin, then Queen Elizabeth was fantastic, the first, the one and only, or whatever. So, I see this as double standards all the way down, a certain kind of hypocrisy. You're ideological if you don't think like me, and I'm reasonable. I can see reality. I know the real world, and you're just stuck in some fanciful, ridiculous ideology. That seems to be how we characterize the other side, always. So you're ignorant and stupid if you don't have the Yale thing, or I'm ignorant and stupid if I don't understand that certain kinds of people defined by their ethnicity or their skin color or whatever are just different, And then somebody should take their rightful place and manage these things. The noble savage isn't noble and not a savage, although the Lakota Nation might be full of noble people who aren't savage in their own context, living their lives and so on. But then we come along and we say, no, go to Catholic school, accept Jesus or die, because you're a savage. Your way of life is savage. God gave us dominion of the earth, and if you don't own the land and do something productive with it as defined by our culture, then you're a savage. State of nature, Thomas Hobbes, this kind of thing. So anyway, the United Nations, even if limited in accomplishment, is a step in the right direction. Don't like that. Colonialism and imperialism are wrong. Liberal. The chief sources of delinquency and crime are ignorance, discrimination, poverty, and exploitation. Liberal. You know, epigenetics, genetics, nature, nurture, growing up in the hood, you know, not having many opportunities. You know, what if you're a Nigerian guy and you become the next greatest quantum physicist or whatever? You know, you're a chip engineer who's Chinese from Yunnan just because you had some opportunity to go to some technical university in Shanghai or Beijing or something. You're not supposed to be that smart. Wow, he is so unique. What an outlier that person is who happened to fall into getting an education. So some of us might think, yeah, you give people an opportunity. Some of them are going to run with it and do great things, and most of them aren't, but that's okay. You give them a chance. Or maybe they're not worth giving a chance because they're just born deficient. I don't know. So we always ought to respect the religious beliefs of others. Liberal. The primary goal of international policy in the nuclear age ought to be peace. Liberal. Why would it be peace? You can have a nuclear war, wipe out the other guy, go through a nuclear winter. Our folks will survive at the end of the day, you know, several thousand years later, we'll bounce back. It'll be great. God's will. But peace? Liberal. You're not realistic. They're going to come and get us, you know? If we don't get them, they're going to get us. Liberal. Steps toward world disarmament would be a good thing. Liberal. Joseph McCarthy was probably the most dangerous man in American public life during the 15 years following the Second World War. Liberal. Why? Just because he hated commies? Why was he dangerous? So 39 questions like that. A full-blown liberal will mark every one, or nearly every one, of these 39 sentences. Agree. And a convinced conservative will mark many or most of them. No. A reactionary, all or nearly all of them. Disagree. So he has confirmed experimentally what is obvious enough from ordinary discourse, that the result is seldom an even balance between agree and disagree. So I'm wondering if we can find areas of common interest and understanding and find some agreement in there. Or if whatever his experiment was, like what did he do? Did he go to Oklahoma University, or what was his sample? How many people did he give this questionnaire to? Where were they from? Were they from Addis Ababa or, Egypt, or were they from where? New York City, San Francisco, Seattle, Boulder, Colorado. So your sample, whatever. So everything's biased in some way or another. So there's chapter 7 is interesting, a critical note in passing, and this is good because it's illustrative and it really kind of shows you some things. So he has L1, which is the liberal, and X1, which is the conservative take. And he has questions like this. Human nature is changing and plastic, with an indefinite potential for progressive development and no innate obstacles to the realization of the good society of peace, justice, freedom, and well-being. So Karl Popper is problematic for certain kinds of conservatives because, this project of getting there. Of course, Steven Pinker would be a problem, Enlightenment Now and all that kind of stuff. of course, we're not going to just get better over time. There's not some teleology going towards utopia that's man-made. This is transcendental. God will determine your salvation and so on. Anyway, why am I interjecting? So the conservative side would say human nature exhibits constant as well as changing attributes. It is at least partially defective or corrupt intrinsically, and thus limited in its potential for progressive development. Oops. In particular, incapable of realizing the good society of peace, justice, freedom, and well-being. So, look, we're never going to realize that. So why try? What we need to do is manage the savage masses in the right way so that they can have meaning, they can have a role to play in society, and the benevolent leaders will naturally want to take care of them because they're generally good. So here's another big one, rationality. Human beings are basically rational. Reason and science are the only proper means for discovering truth and are the sole standard of truth to which authority, custom, intuition, revelation, etc. must give way. Well, we know that's not going to happen. I used to think when, years ago that we were on that trajectory and the internet was going to help everyone become more educated, broad-minded, logical, rational. It didn't happen, not even close. So the conservative side, human beings are moved by sentiment, passion, intuition, and other non-rational impulses at least as much as by reason. Any view of man, history, and society that neglects the non-rational impulses and their embodiment in custom, prejudice, tradition, and authority, or that conceives of a social order in which the non-rational impulses and their embodiments are wholly subject to abstract reason, is an illusion. And he talks a lot about certain kinds of people, ethnicities or whatever around the world who just don't have the civilizing capacities. And, they just don't. And he talks about colonialism and so on. But he always says, he has a disclaimer, I'm not advocating one side or the other, one opinion or the other. I'm just saying this is reality. There are people out there that just can't get their shit together. And when the East India Company comes in, takes over and tells people how to run their lives, everything just gets so much better. Once the Catholic schools are on the plains, the savages are sorted. So this is obviously a biased, jingoistic, perspective that obviously you're going to have. I'm going to go loot this place, and so I need good reasons to do it. And I have my transcendental good reasons to do it. Anyway, it makes sense from a real point of view, like reality, dude. Okay? Not this Peter Joseph's, managing global resources with technology and sensors and people landing on the same values, Star Trek, utopia, bullshit. In many ways, I think that would be an impoverished world because I like cultures. I don't want everybody to be Americanized, but whatever. What kind of Americanized? You're going to be Baptist Americanized, Episcopalian Americanized? Are you going to be what? I think you should be like, Catholic Americanized and, following the rules and stuff, knowing your place. I knew my place and I grew up happy. Happy as a clam. So the obstacles to progress and the sorry, did I read the other one? Oh yeah, an illusion. So anyway, it goes on. I highlighted some of them. Because of the intrinsic and remediable nature of the obstacles, it follows that there are solutions to every social problem, and that progress and the good society can be achieved. Historical optimism is justified. So yeah, you have lots of people like that in the world that believe in solutions and carbon capture, carbon sequestration, and different kinds of energy. We can sort out the nuclear power thing. People can get educated. Stuff like that. Oh yeah, human potential movement, motivational seminars. Steven Pinker again, 3 beautiful books telling us how happy we should be at the progress we've made and how the future is only going to get better. Even though Francis Fukuyama's end of history didn't pan out, and we're heading towards a multipolar world, Duganist, where everybody adheres to their ethno-cultural blood and soil universe. Anyway, I don't know, but here we go. So, since there are intrinsic and permanent as well as extrinsic and remedial obstacles, the good society of universal peace, justice, freedom, and well-being cannot be achieved, and there are no solutions to most of the primary social problems, which are, in truth, not so much problems as permanent conditions of human existence. Plans based on the goal of realizing the ideal society or solving the primary problems are likely to be dangerous as well as utopian. And to lessen rather than increase the probability of bringing about the moderate improvement and partial solutions that are in reality possible. So, yeah, you're tired of the dirty jokes at the office if you're a woman, tired of being slapped on the backside anytime a man wants to do that, tired of being harassed and raped and, treated like an idiot, a second-class citizen. And things change, but it happened too fast and it's radical. And why? We're just being funny. We're just being guys. And why did it change, Well, things do change, and it seems like a lot of people around the world like the change. So why is that? Why is God letting down the world by allowing it to change like that? I mean, obviously, some of the changes in the postmodernist ideologies of academia are ridiculous, but aren't they going to change again eventually? So I don't know. It's not possible, though. And it makes sense from that kind of perspective. So the fact that an institution, belief, or mode of conduct has existed for a long time does not create any presumption in favor of continuing it. So just because, Scandinavia was, pagan for thousands of years doesn't mean that it shouldn't be Christianized. I mean, you got to do it. But no. Some things can change and may be made to change. Other things can't. Depends on where you're sitting and what your timeline is and whatever. So according to conservative perspective, perhaps, although traditional institutions, beliefs, and modes of conduct can get so out of line with real conditions as to become intolerable handicaps to human well-being, there is a certain presumption in their favor as part of the essential fabric of society a strong presumption against changing them both much and quickly. So a gradual change would be better. You know, 10,000 years from now, you have female Episcopalian priests for some reason or whatever, but take your time, man. And, you know, in certain areas, this makes total sense. Slow down. You move too fast. You got to make the morning last, kind of thing. Enjoy the world as it is. In the nice traditional world, the way things were with my grandpappy knew, and so on. So, yeah, it makes sense. So, yeah, let me go back to this one, kinds of ignorance. Yeah. In order to get rid of ignorance, it is necessary and sufficient that there should be ample universal education based on reason and science. There is no indication from experience that universal education based on reason and science, even if it were possible, which it is not, can actually eliminate or even much reduce the kinds of ignorance that bear on individual and social conduct. So again, you know, we got money for this, but we don't have money for that. We have resources for this, but not for that. And if you think the way you think, you're an ideologue. But if I think the way I think, I'm just being realistic. And then you look at the data today, I don't know. Finland, is it happy? Is it successful? Is it secular? What's it like? How did it achieve that? You know, blah, blah, blah. Is it better in Texas? Is Austin better than Houston? And is Dallas better than, you know, San Antonio? And why? What are the numbers? What do they say? Forget about all the economic aspects of it, you know, whether you're Austrian school or Chicago school or whatever. You know, it's like we can look at examples and we can see in the science, the social science and history and literature and culture, and we can look at data, economic data around the world. We can get some information there. Not to say that everything can be perfect or that tradition is not good. You know, you should wipe it all out. I don't believe that for a minute. So the bad institutions can get got rid of by democratic, political, economic, and social reforms. Huh? So the conservative would say, there is no indication from experience that all bad institutions can be got rid of by democratic or any other kind of reform. So there you go. There's no reason to believe that. Even though things have changed, they've gotten better or worse depending on where you sit. But they definitely have changed. Why? Why the age of reason? You know, why the Enlightenment? Why John Locke? You know, where did that all come from? And of course, when you're reading this stuff, you have to understand the philosophers that conservative people look to and admire and the ones they don't like. Like Rousseau. Why don't they like Rousseau? What's wrong with Rousseau? Well, of course, you put him in his context, figure it out if you want to. But anyway, they got a bone to pick. Government should rest as directly as possible on the will of the people. The people, le peuple, French Revolution, oh my God. With each adult human being counting as one and one only, irrespective of sex, color, race, religion, ancestry, property, or education. So you have different models of democracy back in ancient Greece, Roman Republic, other things, if you want to call it that. Experiments with more or less elected officials or whatever, and you looking for models of that, because the mob is crazy, dangerous, and they're ignorant, stupid. They don't know what they're doing. You got to watch them. You got to have the right kind of people managing those crowds, keeping them in their proper place. And There's differences between sex, color, race, religion, ancestry, wealth. Differences, hierarchies. You can't say there isn't. There always has been, always will be. A number of principles, so the conservative side, X12, a number of principles have been appealed to as the legitimate basis of government, and most of these have been associated in the course of time with bad, indifferent, and moderately good government. So it's either bad, indifferent, or moderately good. And, you could easily come to that conclusion looking at history. Government resting on unqualified universal franchise, especially where the electorate includes sizable proportions of uneducated or propertyless persons or cohesive subgroups, tends to degenerate into semi-anarchy or into forms of despotism, Caesarism, Bonapartism, that manipulate the democratic formula for anti-democratic ends. So, what do we do? Have a civics test for people? You have to own a certain amount of money. You have to have a certain number of copper coins to join the Roman military, to go fight in Afghanistan. You have to be a certain kind of property holder to be able to vote on something or whatever. You have these means testing. You have to be a certain color, a certain religion. You have to, pass some tests to participate in running a country, a society, a culture. And look, traditionally, right, you have the chief of the tribe and the elders and the medicine man or woman, and these people are respected in certain ways, in the warrior class, and Kshatriya, whatever, in India, wherever you are in the world, you have all this stuff. This is a very Anglo-centric perspective on things, not to think about Sri Lanka or Indonesia or Saudi Arabia or any other place in Africa, all those different cultures and languages, regions, and many of the borders were drawn by colonial powers and so on. So this is, the West committing suicide, where we should have dominion, because if we do it traditionally in the right way, we're all that for some reason. Or why wouldn't you want to fight for what you believe in? Why wouldn't you want to go against the Baptists and the Pentecostalists and all the heretics and the Catholics? Gangs of New York. How bad was it in 1846 in New York City with all the gangs? All these semi-ignorant folks just hating on each other because they're part of a different clique. And what happens with the Crips and the Bloods and Black Lives Matter and all that stuff? We're still in this situation. That's reality. Face it. L13. Since there are no differences among human beings considered in their political capacity as the foundation of legitimate, that is, democratic government, the ideal state will include all human beings. And the ideal government is world government. Meanwhile, short of the ideal, we should support and strengthen the United Nations, the World Court, and other partial steps towards an international political order and world government, as these become successively possible in practice. So you have the New World Order, but for us, not for them. You have all these global institutions, but we're an exception to the rule. The laws don't apply to us, everybody else, but not us. We're not signatories to it. So our team can't go to The Hague, go to court, but their team can. Double standards all the way down, like turtles all the way down. Double standards and hypocrisy. Depending on where you stand, the other team is ideological and stupid and unrealistic and ignorant, living in a fantasy world, subject to some crazy cultish religion, religious sensibility, not founded in reality. They don't like globalism. They don't like global anything, global institutions, George Soros and blah, blah, conspiracies, the great replacement. You have the great reset. Everything's great. Make America great again. And we should be scared because we're not going to own anything. We're going to rent everything, and we're going to be happy. Soma, 1984, Brave New World, over again and again and again. And these are things to be feared. Somehow there's some other project out there, a conservative project or some project makes more sense. The Dugan-esque multipolar world and so on. Get rid of the U.S. hegemon, the empire, the dollar, whatever, and all of us can go back to living the way we want to live until some new East India company comes along and says, we want your shit because we need it to run the world in the proper way. Suddenly all that tolerance for difference and variety of culture just goes out the window, doesn't it? So the global institutions, the conservative perspective, or one particular kind of conservative perspective on this is, in their existential reality, human beings differ so widely that their natural and prudent political ordering is unto units more limited and varied than a world state. A world state having no roots in human memory, feeling, and custom would inevitably be abstract and arbitrary, thus despotic in the foreseeable future, if it could conceivably be brought into being. Though modern conditions make desirable more international cooperation than in the past, we should be cautious in relation to internationalizing institutions, especially when these usurp functions heretofore performed by more parochial bodies. Makes sense. So a lot of it makes sense. Small is beautiful. Think global, act local. Leave us alone. Let us get on with doing our own thing. You have all these Christian groups that live kind of apart from mainstream modern society. They do quite well. They're not cults. People can come and go. And yeah, you have your local resources. You're the Anasazi. You know how to live in the desert. We know how to live in the plains. All this kind of stuff. So I'll continue in a sec. Let me just finish. So anyway, in social, economic, and cultural, as well as political affairs, men are of right equal social. So yeah, let's forget about the inequalities. I do think that there has to be inequality to a certain degree, but not such insane inequalities where some people have way, way too much and other people don't have anything. So there's a compromise somewhere maybe. So yeah, back here. Social hierarchies and distinctions among human beings are bad and should be eliminated, especially those distinctions based on custom, tradition, prejudice, superstition, and other non-rational sources such as race, color, ancestry, property, particularly the landed and inherited property and religion. So that's liberal. The conservative aspect, it is impossible and undesirable to eliminate hierarchies and distinctions among human beings. A large number of distinctions and groupings, rational and non-rational, contributes to the variety and richness of civilization and should be welcomed, except where some gross and remedial cruelty or inequity is involved. So if it's cruel or gross, but this sounds very Dugan-esque to me. Wonder where he got those ideas. L16. Subgroups of humanity defined by color, race, sex, or other physical or physiological attributes do not differ in civilizing potential. He talks a lot about civilizing potential. So how would one define civilization? What is that? How do we define Western civilization? What's the big basket? What are all those varieties we're talking about in the basket of Western civilization? Some people can civilize things and some people can't. So you go across the world and you say, man, your culture is just not civilized, but we'll help you with that. So anyway, subgroups of humanity defined by color, race, sex, or other physical or physiological attributes do not differ in civilizing potential. All the same. They can civilize things. It just might civilize you into Hinduism or something. Islam, as opposed to civilizing you into Catholicism. So the reactionary, the conservative might say, whether or not subgroups of humanity defined by physical or physiological attributes differ congenitally and innately in civilizing potential, they do differ in their actual civilizing ability at the present time and are likely to continue so to differ for as long in the future as is of practical concern. So, maybe genetically, intrinsically, you're capable of civilizing potential, but for all practical purposes, you're never going to realize that capability. I mean, who knows when? It could be thousands of years from now, if I have my way. So that's, reality, right? We just have more civilizing potential than you guys, because civilization is this, not that. L18, you're liberal. It is always preferable to settle disputes among groups, classes, and nations, as among individuals, by free discussion, negotiation, and compromise, not by conflict, coercion, or war. Well, let's be realistic, shall we? Conservative perspective might be something like this. Disputes among groups, classes, and nations can and should be settled by free discussion, negotiation, and compromise when, but only when, the disputes range within some sort of common framework of shared ideas and interests. When the disputes arise out of a clash of basic interests and an opposition of root ideas, as is from time to time inevitably the case, then they cannot be settled by negotiation and compromise, but must be resolved by power, coercion, and sometimes war. So I don't have that much in common with you, man. So we're going to have war, and we'll see who wins. You go in as a Roman general and you say, you got two choices to get with the program, or we can fight. And then Rome usually wins. And that's great if you're Roman. But then the tables turn, and the barbarians are at the gate. Ostrogoths, Visigoths, all these different types of people. And they actually win. Think about the Ottoman Empire. What happened? Where was God when the Ottomans took over? So he says, a disclaimer down here, I repeat that the second X list is presented only for the sake of the first L, only to throw additional light on the meaning of the first, and not at all to argue any virtues in the second list might be thought to possess, or to recommend it to the reader. He's not recommending you think like these conservative perspectives. He's just throwing light on what it means to be a liberal, just so you know what liberals are like. I should, however, note that besides the specific differences in content between each of the 19 beliefs, in the one list and in its opposite number in the X list, the L list and the X list, there is a difference in structure as well as content between the two sets of 19 taken in their entirety. And he goes on to explain what that is, but he's always on about ideology. So the L list is the verbalization of a single, more or less systemic ideology, the ideology of modern liberalism. And so within that big basket of values, that is modern liberalism. And all of it is contained in that one ideology. The X list, though it perhaps has a recognizably conservative, quote unquote, cast, does not constitute an ideology, not any ideology at all. The 19 X beliefs are related much more loosely to each other, both logically and psychologically, than the 19 L beliefs. Thus, the two sets are not true opposites of each other. Though each individual pair consists of logical contraries, the two sets are two different kinds of things, like a house and an apple. More generally, the alternatives to an ideology are not solely other ideologies. There is also the possibility of abandoning ideologies and ideological thinking altogether, which is what the conservative-esque kind of thing is. So a convinced liberal believes all of the 19 L beliefs, or is at any rate logically committed to belief in all or nearly all of them. So it's a basket of values that you're all in on, democracy, individualism, and so on. But the X list is not so all or nothing, both logically and psychologically. It is not only possible, but frequently the case that a person should believe 6 or 8 of the X beliefs and doubt or reject the rest. For several, he might substitute the corresponding L beliefs, and for others, alternative beliefs that I have not stated. So he's saying that the X reactionary side or whatever is more open-minded. They can take bits and pieces from here and there on board, and other things we haven't even talked about. So he says this book is in no way concerned to refute liberalism. The question of the truth or falsity of an ideology is in any case of minor importance. Human beings believe an ideology as a rule, not because they are convinced rationally that it is true, but because it satisfies psychological and social needs and serves or seems to serve individual or group interests. Of course, that's not what conservative cultures do. Kings, queens, priests, bosses, or whatever, talk about your various kinds of social economic theories. So anyway, that's the idea. And he goes on and on and on about this all over the place throughout the whole book. Do liberals really believe in liberalism? That's an interesting one. the liberal order of values. And he really gets into things here about, how can you blame uh, imperialism or whatever for anything? I mean, I don't want to mischaracterize it because it's pretty interesting, so you should read it. The guilt of the liberal, the dialectic of liberalism. Again, who are the liberals? So he goes back and puts icing on the cake there just to make sure all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. The drift of U.S. foreign policy. And all of this just relates to today. And liberalism, obviously, versus reality. So I think these two Burnham books, The Machiavellians and The Suicide of the West, are important books if you want to understand how a lot of people feel around the world. It's not as simple as this because there are different flavors of conservatism, which is why I call this the grayscale of the right, adventures on the grayscale. So between the far right and the far left is a big grayscale, and then each extreme is a grayscale. But there are so many things in common. So the root beliefs or values or the crux of the ideology is shares a lot of things in common. So if you're looking at Dugin as a right-wing person in the United States, you'll recognize a lot of things in his philosophy. That's why it may appear that some right-wing people are more sympathetic to Putin, but then other people take a international law perspective on it. Other people take a geostrategic perspective on it. Some people blame NATO, broken agreements, broken trust, lack of peacemaking efforts, just realpolitik and competition for natural resources, power, energy, markets, people being, tired of the West or the Americanized West or the Anglosphere in the North dominating the rest of the world, bullying people. Maybe there needs to be a shift in power centers and so on. We miss the Cold War. It's can be very lucrative setup to have a natural enemy and see the world in terms of this almost biblical existential conflict. It works in a lot of ways, and when you don't have it, it's a bummer. If the end of history doesn't result in Disneyland in every single country around the world, and everyone watching Netflix and everybody shopping on Amazon, which is what we have. Why? Why do people want shopping malls in Portugal? What is it? Technology transfer to China. China becomes the manufacturer of the world. China starts to create its own technology, its own computer chips, its own robots, its own electric cars, its own fashion brands, its own Twitter, its own Amazon, Alibaba, right? Doing all that stuff, becomes a major competitor to the United States. And then you have all of these demographic issues. Oh, the Chinese aren't having enough babies. The Japanese aren't having enough babies. Americans. And great replacement theories about how Muslims are going to have more babies and so on. And most of this can be refuted using data, facts, information, analysis, science, all kinds of tools to find out, is it more right or wrong to think in Machiavellian terms, or to think that the woke masses are going to take everything over and you're not going to be able to go to church or whatever, to blame what on secularization. Is science satanic? Is scientism a religion? Liberals are ideological, conservatives aren't. And we point the finger back and forth stubbornly, refusing to listen to each other. And there you have a major problem. So, I'm just going to leave it there for now. Next time, I'm going to talk about modernism, just from one basic bunch of notes that I have, and the French New Right, which I also find extremely fascinating. So here's the French New Right. It's neither right or left. This is from 2014. So, yeah. So, and then we'll kind of break down these different terms and so on, and what pisses people off about a particular philosopher, if you're from the right, or globalization, immigration, miscegenation, mixing of the races, gay marriage, cross-dressing, I mean, how many people actually really do want to get a sex change and wind up getting a sex change? Is that going to be the end of the world? What was it like in Rome back in the day? There were periods of time where things were very, moralistic. People had their moral compasses, and some things were verboten or thought to be wrong. You can't say that ancient Romans were any more broad-minded or than people are now. Things change. Things always change. In the meantime, we have to maintain order, peace, prosperity, feed people, and so on. These are things that are desirable for most people. And there are reasons why certain things become prevalent in the world and other things fade away. So, why, And if God wants Donald Trump to be president, well, by God, God's going to make Donald Trump president. So get out there and do your bit. Make sure he gets in. And then you might decide, non-ideologically, of course, that you might need to wage war to get your guy in, because those other people just don't get it. You don't have much in common with them. So the Civil War, the big breakup in the United States, people are going to have to go their own way. All right. I'll talk to you again soon. Take good care. Bullion T out.
Say, in the matter of the Moscow purge trials that were simultaneous with the Spanish Civil War, he would hasten to remind us that water so long over the dam had best be forgotten.